What's up? Welcome to another episode in this YouTube live interview series where I have fun and insightful conversations with other business owners and entrepreneurs, packed with golden nuggets of helpful information and inspiration so that you can grow your online business in a way that works for you. So if you're watching us live, if you're watching the replay, whichever it is, please take a second and just thumbs up this video. That simple thumbs up does go a long way with the YouTube algorithm, pushing up my videos and my channel to new people that might be interested in it. So just a really quick thumbs up for me. And if you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you can get notified when I'm doing another YouTube live or when a new video gets published on the channel. So today's topic is going to be all about using a podcast to grow your business and build your brand with our guest, Deirdre Tshien. So we're going to talk about the power of podcasting for growing a business, building a growing listener base, because we know that that can kind of be an issue sometimes when you're like first kicking off a podcast. We're going to be talking about making money from your podcast. Personally, I feel like I'm really interested in what Deirdre has to say about this because I host a podcast and I'm very interested in some tips here. We're going to be talking about analyzing performance and so much more. But before we get into the interview, I do have to shout out our sponsor, which is very fitting for the conversation that we're about to have. So the sponsor of this video is the Curiously Guided podcast. So it's the podcast that I host. Well, I co-host it with one of my really good friends, Shay. And this podcast is for intentional business owners and curious minds. So if you're picking up and you're liking my vibe and the way that I have conversations and ask questions and all of that stuff, and you're a business owner, or you're just curious about combining the inner work with the outer work to create a life, business, or career that feels deeply fulfilling and wildly aligned, then definitely check out the Curiously Guided podcast. We're available on all listening platforms, and we just launched season 4. So there's going to be new episodes coming out every single Tuesday. We're so excited to continue the journey on Curiously Guided. So you can learn more about us at curiouslyguided.com, or you can search on your favorite listening platform, Curiously Guided, and you should be able to find us there. But I think that it's time to bring on Deirdre from backstage and just chat about using podcasting to grow your business. So let's bring her in here. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
I'm
Oh
so
my
excited.
God. I am so excited. I cannot believe that we connected 2 years ago.
I think it was longer. It might have been longer.
Actually over 2 years ago. And then I think we oh my gosh, it's been crazy. It's been a crazy journey. Right? So I'm excited to get into it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when we first got connected, you kind of were really experimenting with your brainchild, if I can say
Yes.
that, like Capsho. And it's completely, we were talking about before we went live, it's completely shifted. And now you're really focusing on using Capsho for like to help podcasters. And so I feel like you have your own podcast, you're working with podcasters constantly.
Yeah.
And so I feel like you would be the very best person to come on and kind of chat about this. So I didn't dive too much into your background. Do you just want to catch the people up? Like, how do you support people?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. So really quickly, my name's Deirdre Tshien. I'm CEO and co-founder of Capsho. I've been in entrepreneurship for well over a decade, which is really aging me. And basically, I've been through all of the struggles. So I know literally, if you're an entrepreneur yourself, I know all of the pain and everything that you're going through. But when I met Mariah, I was actually a coach. I was coaching e-commerce businesses at the time, and I think I actually got her onto my virtual summit at that time to talk about SEO. And that was actually when I had my very first podcast. So it was a podcast that was very e-commerce slanted around all of the tools, tactics, strategies to grow an e-commerce business online. And basically one thing led to another. I had a podcast myself, but I was also talking to a lot of our clients around how to storytell, how to differentiate yourself online, which has to be through through your stories and through your experiences and through the value that only you can provide. And I was talking to e-commerce businesses at the time, and they were like, I get what you're saying, but there's a reason why I went to a product-based business. I don't want to be the face of my business. I don't want to have to do these things. And even if I did, I wouldn't know how to. And so that was actually the first iteration of Capsho that I remember showing you, Mariah. We went through a demo of it, and you actually had some feedback on it yourself. And basically, that very first iteration of Capsho was all about how do we help people tell their story. So we took them through a journey.
Yep.
They would type their story in, and then Capsho at the time would convert that into a bank of social media captions and emails. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. This is the best thing since sliced bread. It's going to help all entrepreneurs tell their story, get really authentic online, and really start to connect with their audience. But for some reason, it just didn't take off. I mean, I have no idea why. But I was talking to a coach, and I was like, there's got to be something wrong with our messaging. It must be something about our headline or our tag. Something wasn't working. And the more that we got into it, the more that he was like, so who exactly are you targeting? And I was like, well, all entrepreneurs. Obviously, all entrepreneurs can use this. And he's like, oh, no.
The worst question for an established business owner to hear is to work with a coach and to have them be like, who is your target audience? Because you're literally like, bruh, I have done this so many times. I have it outlined. So it's hilarious. I'm so glad that you're sharing this, because that's where roadblocks can be.
Oh, totally. Because that's the thing. I mean, I said at the beginning, I've been in entrepreneurship for over 10 years now. And even now I still get stuck in the whole, let's go back to the foundations, let's go back to basics and figure out who our audience is and all of that. And so we went through that painful process. And his really, really valuable advice was, well, right now, what we were finding with the very first iteration of Capsho was that we were having to convince people that they had to tell their stories. And so there was almost this convincing part. And then there was okay, well, now that you're convinced, now you can use Capsho, and now you have to learn how to use it. And so he was like, if you can just cut through that first part of the noise, how can you just talk to people who know the value of storytelling and sharing their experiences? Who are they? Who would they be? And I went on this 90-minute walk because I was trying to because you have to lift yourself out of what it is that you currently know.
Yep.
And I had to go through that process, and I was like, well, I mean, I'm a podcaster. That's literally what I do each and every week. I share my stories, I share my experiences, and then I share the things I learned off the back of that. I was like, this is a no-brainer. How did I not think about this? Podcasters are literally the people that I need to be talking to, being one myself. And so when I had that epiphany, I was like, everything, and I think we spoke about this, Mariah, before, everything falls into place.
Yep.
Once you have this clarity, it's oh my gosh, everything, it just starts, and it's almost magically feels like it happens.
Yes. And you're like, why did it take so long?
Yeah, right.
It's because you have to keep collecting the data points. You wouldn't have had that epiphany if you didn't already have the data points of throwing Capsho out there and just to see how people reacted with it.
Yeah, 100%. So that's kind of how Capsho as it is now came about, where I was like, okay, so we have our fundamental, the thing that we're trying to solve for is how do we help people amplify the very, very important message? Each and every one of us has so many good, important things that we need to get out there that people need to hear. And it's a struggle doing that. I mean, I know, Mariah, with a pod, it's relatively easy to set up a podcast and to hit publish every week, but that's kind of when the work starts. It's then how do you grow the thing, and how do you monetize it, and how do you keep this engine going? And that was what we found ourselves really leaning into solving for. And so that's what Capsho does now, which is it takes your audio or video podcast or video content, your live stream, you put it into Capsho, and in under 10 minutes, it creates all of your content marketing assets for you. So we're talking the title and description, social media posts across all of the different platforms, emails, YouTube description, LinkedIn articles, 4 different types of blog posts. It smartly identifies sound bites and quotes for you. It has a short form script generator. Literally all the things that you need to be able to actually not only market your podcast and your content, but yourself actually is really what you're doing.
Yeah. I think that Capsho is such a great tool. And like, I personally have only had experience with it in the beginning, and I wrote down, it's so funny because like AI started blowing up, like a couple months ago, like not that long ago. And I was like, wait a minute, Capsho was the very first taste that I got with like an AI software that was really trying to help in a way that was really needed. And I think that you pointed out something that's really important, of just like how important storytelling is. It's so important, whether you're going to be a podcaster or any type of business owner, like e-commerce. And I remember when we were having the conversation of just like e-commerce, like we need to start storytelling. And then it was like trying to pull teeth to get that to happen, even though we know how important it is.
Yes.
So I think that naturally progressing into the podcast realm is so aligned. And like, that's why me and Shay started Curiously Guided, is because like, we just wanted to have conversations and like ask questions and like be really curious and just like share our stories and our guest stories with other people, because there's so much value in hearing how other people are going through things. And I think that it's so inspiring and motivating. And as humans, like podcasting really is like how we can easily connect with our people. It's not the only way. There are plenty of other ways to do it if you're not interested in podcasting, but if you're not interested in podcasting, you're probably not watching this. So I think this already answers my first question, but like, who do you think podcasting is great for, and who do you think it's not great for?
I as in being a podcaster, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually think that honestly, anyone can podcast. Now, I do have some caveats. Like literally anyone can podcast if you want to. The caveats are, it is not an easy thing to do. So it's like anyone who can podcast, but you have to have a passion, and you have to have, and through that passion, you'll find a goal for your podcast. Because I can tell you, like, yes, it's relatively easy to get a podcast stood up, and there's a ton of tools that can help make that process easy, and Capsho is one of them. But then being consistent with that, like each and every week, it's hard. I'm not going to lie. There were times when I'm like, what in the world am I doing? Like, I don't want to have to sit down and like write or think about another podcast episode. Like it's not the easiest thing to do. And it's a long tail form of, it's kind of like SEO and or like an expert in SEO, but it's like, it's not one of those things that gets you quick results, like instantly. And so that instant gratification that we all have a need for, unfortunately, podcasting doesn't give that to you.
Yeah. And it's so funny because like I was having a conversation of like, what organic form of marketing does? What organic form of marketing like gives you really quick results? If you want to make money from Instagram, you have to start an Instagram and grow a following from scratch. Like every organic marketing strategy does take time. So keep that in mind. And then also keep in mind that like, this is what really helped us for our podcast, was doing seasons. So it's like we have 20 episodes in a season, and then we have a big break in between seasons so that we can take a look at our metrics and like reconvene and like, how did last season go? And so that's been helpful for us. And I've even heard other people going from weekly to bi-weekly has been really helpful to take the pressure off. So it's like, if you're considering podcasting, just know that like you can chop and screw and dice this like any way that you want to.
100%. And that's why I kind of say, like, kind of facetious, like anyone can do this, like literally. Now what I do predominantly talk to my audience, and people who use Capsho are predominantly experts who podcast. So expert entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, service providers. And so that's who I nerd out with day in and day out around the type of content that they create, and why they're doing it. And that's why I say, even if you're not an expert entrepreneur, you can 100% podcast. You just have to have a passion for the thing that you're talking about to keep you going through the hard times. And then through that, and that's why I say through that passion, you've got to have a goal. Because if you're an entrepreneur, I mean, your goal is probably grow an audience, get people to buy your thing. If you don't have that as your goal and you're doing this out of a passion project, you've got to find a goal in some way. I mean, it could be through you're just so passionate about the topic that you just want to create more content about it and spread the word to more people, which is awesome. You might also have a goal that, yes, you want to do that, but you also want to monetize at some point through sponsorships. Awesome. So what is that goal? I think if you can keep that goal in mind, then the whole podcasting process, as hard as it is, actually becomes quite enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, I was explaining before we hopped on live that like our podcast, Curiously Guided, we don't use it like a lot of other podcasts. Like a lot of other podcasts are using, like their goal is to grow their business and to build their brand. And like, I think that our podcast started as more of like a passion project, but we're not essentially using it to build our business, but we are kind of using it to build our personal brands.
Yeah.
If you think about it that way. And so there's like different ways to look at it. But in terms of starting a podcast, like say somebody wants to start it for business growth because they've heard over and over again, like, oh, you should start a podcast. Like if you want to get off of social media and you want to stop creating Instagram reels, you should start a podcast. Like what makes podcasting such a great platform for growing a business?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Okay, let me go through this as systematically as possible. Okay, so the first thing is just the fact that a podcast is something that people consume almost at any time. So for me, I go for a run. And when I go for a run, I listen to podcasts. I've also started, even when I'm like washing dishes, I'll listen to a podcast. Literally it's the thing that people are tuning into more and more when they have time on their hands, because they can driving, like the podcast is literally the number one. It's actually overtaken radio as the number one audio medium.
I feel like that's not surprising. Like who listens to the radio besides my father?
Right? Yeah. So that's like immediately you have people who want to be listening to a podcast. And honestly, like it is the closest, it sounds a bit trite when I say this, but having like you plugged into someone's ears is like the closest way that you get into their brains. Like the connection that it creates is just so strong. And so from a building your brand perspective, it is up there. Now, then there are actual other tangible things that come with the back of podcasting. The first is, and I so truly believe this, is that you are creating this. Your podcast is anchor content. And that's what I've actually found to be one of the most powerful things about having a podcast is actually not the podcast itself, funnily enough, but it's actually what you create around the podcast. And I can talk to how Capsho helps with this, but it actually helps you create so much more content than just the podcast itself. The second thing is that it actually has such a great networking effect. Right.
Truly. It's such an easy way to collaborate when you have a podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Like you're just like, hey, you want to come on mine? And they're like, hey, you want to come on mine? And you're just like, yeah, cool. We're just like sharing our genius with so many people. I love podcasts.
And yeah, you learn so much. You meet so many people. It's an amazing networking tool, especially for introverts like me, where I'm like, I don't love reaching out to people, but when you have your own platform like you created with your podcast, it actually makes it so much easier. So is that. And the other thing that I'm starting to realize as well, and we can get into this a little bit more, is like your podcast. When I think about content that we can create in, organic marketing world, there's actually, it's kind of like land or property when you think about it. Like there's content that you can create where you're renting land or you're just renting the space. And then there's content that you can create where you're actually build, like you own that land, you own that space. And the reason why this is important is because when we get into the monetization talks, and when even further than that, if you're ever thinking about exiting, and you can actually create a business around a podcast, when you're thinking about exiting, then you actually want to think about what assets you're creating. Like, and I don't mean assets by way of like content assets. I mean like true assets in the true word of asset, like value, literally monetary, like $sign value that you can actually create. And a podcast is actually one of those assets that you are actually building, not just renting. So we can go into that a little bit more, but that's something that I think is really, really important and sets it apart from other types of content.
I love everything that you said, especially like, so I moved from Buffalo and I'm living on a mountain in North Carolina. And it's like, we're so far away from everything. It's a half hour in order to get to the grocery store. I can only listen to my favorite artist, Trevor Hall, like so many times.
Yeah.
But like, thank God for podcasts. It's been the thing that's like gotten me through the drives to literally to like buy fruit. Like I have
Yes.
to drive an extended period of time. So yeah, we can listen to it while we're running, while we're walking, while we're driving, while we're doing anything. And like, I feel like I'm just going to end up reiterating literally everything you said because I just agree with all of it. But like, it also really helps. I feel like if you're a verbal processor, it's very helpful because it then allows you to create all of your other content and repurpose it for all other platforms. Because it's like, you don't have to sit and look at like an empty Google Doc to like write a blog post or like plan out an Instagram post. Instead, you could be like, oh, shoot, I've been getting a question from my clients or like from my audience. It's going to be a pain in the butt to sit here and type out a response. Why don't I just create a podcast episode about it? And then you just send that podcast episode to people. And it just becomes something that you can like naturally refer people back to. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations with people or clients. And I'm like, oh yeah, I have a podcast episode about that where we really dive into it. Like, I'll shoot you over the link. And it's just like sustainable resources. It's so powerful for helping build a business.
100%. It's seriously like, I cannot say enough good things about podcasting. So if you're not podcasting, get in right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the thing that kind of holds people back besides like, oh, how do I host it? And so I wanted to say really quick, you can get very complex with podcasts. You can also get very simple. I have a friend who literally records her audio on her iPhone in her truck. Like, we don't have to like overcomplicate this. If you have a message, if you have a story, don't let like the tech hold you back. There are easy ways to do it. You don't like, if I listen to the audio of our first season, it was no bueno, but it's like, we got better, but we wouldn't have figured out that we needed to get better until we realized that it wasn't that great. So it's like, you can do this anyway. But besides that, I think the next thing that kind of stresses people out is growing and building like an audience base or a listener base. Like, do you have any tips for people? Like, how do we get people to actually listen to the stuff that I'm saying?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, I wish there was a silver bullet to this, but unfortunately there is not. It just, when you think about it, that's why I say building a podcast is like building a business, literally. My short answer to that, I actually talk about something that I call the traffic pyramid, and the traffic pyramid actually works regardless of what it is. If you're aiming to grow something, you can use a traffic pyramid. So I'll just go through it really quickly, not in too much detail because I could literally spend like the next 2 days talking about this. But essentially, there's 4 tiers to the traffic pyramid. The bottom tier is what we call I call it passive organic marketing. And what that bottom tier literally means is that you are just passively creating content, kind of like what we're talking about, right? You're just hitting record to record a podcast episode, or you're hitting record to create video content, or you're publishing a blog post, or you're creating social media posts. You're just putting things out there, and it's kind of passive because you're kind of like hoping that it's going to work. And I think, as we know by now, that's not, so that's the first thing.
It's my favorite form of marketing. I'm just like, yo, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to create this, I'm going to push it out, and I'm going to leave it up to the universe.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. It's like, I wish that would just work day in, day out, but but it doesn't. But it's important. It's an important part of the traffic pyramid because organic marketing has to start somewhere, and it starts with just the content that you create. The second tier to the traffic pyramid is then what I call active organic marketing. So this is now where you put the content that you create to work, to get it working for you. And it really depends on where you're trying to get it to work on. So, in Mariah's world, like SEO is a big, so if you're trying to get discovered through search, then there are certain things that you have to do to activate that content for you. You can even do that with a podcast. So in-app players like Spotify and iTunes have SEO. It's not as sophisticated as, a Google, but it does have some SEO capabilities. And so if you can really start to lean into, okay, what do you have to do to activate that type of content, then you'll actually start to see the results of that. Now, that's search. And then there's like social media and all of the that whole world of like explore content is what I call it.
So it's
And
essentially like intentional organic
yes,
marketing, where it's
that's
like you're
right.
being very focused and specific on what you're doing versus like just creating content and like letting it float
Yes.
in the atmosphere. Okay.
That's exactly right. So that's like the second tier. The third tier then is all about leveraging other people's audiences. And so this is where again podcasting is just a natural fit for this, because if you get guests on and they share your podcast, the podcast episode that you did together, that's already a form of leveraging other people's audiences.
Yeah.
But there are so many countless numbers of ways that you can do this and leverage other people's audiences. You know, people who have newsletters, people who have you could even, you know, there's a ton, even in the podcasting world there are things like feed drops and you know, you could even do swapped ads, things like that,
Yep.
that, you know, you're literally leveraging their podcast audience as well. And then the top tier, which I don't really recommend for podcasting a lot, is scaling through paid ads. Now there is a way that if you wanted to do it for your podcast, totally, and I know some of those ways, but I just, if you're getting started, I just wouldn't even think about doing that. This
Yeah.
is really for the
You have to
advanced.
test and tweak first before you start throwing money at it like that.
Yeah, for sure. So that's kind of, you know, whenever I think about growing, you know, and the question was, how do we actually get listeners? How do we grow a podcast? It's going back to that traffic pyramid and going, okay, how do I, on that first year, how do I just create really, really great content? And I know, Mariah, we spoke about this with Curiously Guided around where you guys have even landed on the type of content. It's like the intersection of the audience that you want to be talking to and the content that they actually want to hear from you specifically. So if you can get that, that's actually how you can already start to create really, really great content for that first tier. And then the second tier is just choose like max 2 platforms that you want to activate on, right? And so and just go through like really nerding out on how you can be intentional, as I said, about those platforms. And then so that already you will start to see, because we've had people do this in our audience, and just by doing those 2 things, they're like, oh my gosh, my podcast downloads is already like doubling, tripling. And then you add on that leveraging other people's audiences, and it's like,
it builds so much quicker, truly.
Yeah.
And like, here's the funny thing. I feel like you can gain listeners for your podcast if you tell people that you have a podcast.
Yeah.
I know, like, it seems simple, but it's like, if you literally
crazy.
in conversations, and I think that that's why I'm glad that you brought up, like, it has to be something that you care about, because when you care about it, it's easier to naturally fit it into conversations. You're not walking in, you're like, I'm going to this networking group and I'm going to get podcast listeners. Instead, you're just like going to this networking group, connecting with people. They're asking you about what you do and like blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh yeah. And then like I host a podcast, Curiously Guided. It's like my passion project where we're combining the inner work and the outer work. And then it's like an ear prick up moment. People are like, oh, like that sounds super cool. Like, I'm going to check that out. And also like utilizing your newsletter, like you don't have to send every single episode to your newsletter, but remind them like once a month that like you have a podcast, and link them into like a episode that you think would make sense. So I think that there's so many different ways to do this. And like with Curiously Guided, we are really stepping into guesting on other people's podcasts now too, because that's an intentional way that we want to grow. Like the intentional organic stuff, like, yo, I got Instagram for my own business. I'm not trying to like go hard in the paint for Instagram for my podcast, but guesting, we've realized like we love podcasting. We love storytelling. So why not grow our podcast in a way that supports our strengths and how we want to show up? And the listeners of like other podcasts are more likely to be a listener of your podcast because they're already podcast listeners. You're not showing up on LinkedIn being like, you should listen to my podcast. And they're like, I've never listened to a podcast before, literally ever.
It's so true. That's like literally, yeah, one of the, and what you said, you hit the nail on the head. It's like, as much as possible, you want to get in front of other podcast listeners because that is literally, if you want like sort of a quick way. And that's why things like feed swaps and things like that work really well, because they're already listening to other podcasts. So it's just such a great way for them to be like, oh, okay, well, I'll just check this one out. I'm already on Spotify or iTunes. It's easy to check it out. So 100%, you're right.
Yeah, and also being intentional with your guests. Like, we've seen a lot of podcast growths simply from being intentional about the people that we interview on our podcast, and then they naturally share it to an
Mhm.
audience that already overlaps with our listener audience. So I feel like just allowing yourself to be very intentional about this and like, who do you want to have conversations with? Who is your audience? Talking about it and then getting on other podcasts. I think that those are really great ways to really start building a listener base without stressing yourself out about it, without trying to hit like 10,000 downloads a month. It's like, not, it's about testing and tweaking in the
Mm.
beginning. Like, we're just starting season 4. We're still testing and tweaking and just starting to explore this stuff. But this next question is selfishly because we're interested in kind of exploring this, but like, can you give some ways that people can start making money from their podcast? Because I feel like a lot of people are like, well, podcasting, I'm essentially creating more free content. And it's just like free content. And how do I actually make money from this? Because your girl's got to pay her bills. So, like, any there?
Yeah, so there's kind of there's probably more, but right, I've just distilled it down to two main ways that you can look at making money from your podcast. And I would say that there's still, just to be truly fully transparent, they are still going to take a little bit of time. So one is that you actually just have a back end offer. I mean, and honestly, like that is probably the quickest way to start with. Now, the back end offer can be something that you might already have a business, and so you can just send people there, or you might not have anything, and that's okay, because then you can either come up with something, or you can actually become an affiliate and try to make money that way. So that's like one part. It's like, how do you offer a product or service, something from your podcast? Now, there is, like, I say that like it sounds easy. It's simple. It's not easy, because there are things that you need to do, like how to use a podcast to actually build an email list. This was all the stuff that I struggled through with my first podcast. It was like, how am I using this thing to actually grow my business? And what it really comes down to is like, the podcast is kind of like your microphone. It's a way to get people interested in the things that you're talking about, and connect with you, but you still have to send them somewhere to actually then actually opt in for the thing. So yes, you can send them straight to something to opt into, or what I do, I call it the show notes funnel, is I actually send them first to my email list, and I do this by I actually do bonus clips for my episodes, and I'll be like, oh well, if I have a guest on, I'll be like, we actually spoke about this really cool thing. Or you notice when, Kevin mentioned that he actually highly recommends doing solo episodes. I asked him why that was. And if you want to learn the answer to that, that's actually a bonus clip. So you can find that in the show notes. So people opt in for that. They get onto my email list. And then from there, I can continue to nurture them into the sale, into,
I didn't
wanting.
realize I was muted, but I literally was just like, that is so smart.
Yeah, so that's like so I love that. Like, literally, we have people who are like, oh my gosh, I think I've opted into your email list about 67 times, because it's like, it's good stuff that they want to hear about. So that's so yeah, so I say, like, you can definitely use your podcast to monetize by way of selling something. But the key to that is, you still want to be building an email list in order to keep selling them the things.
Yeah.
That's one part of it. And that can be either your own thing or someone else's thing, which is through affiliate commission.
Okay. So essentially, I guess we could just use Curiously Guided here. So we just started this season kind of creating a commercial for the contract shop, which we're an affiliate for. And I recorded a commercial and we're just popping it in. And essentially that's how we plan to monetize right now, because since Curiously Guided is a passion project for us, we're not like, I'm not selling SEO services through there. I mean, if people find me and like that, that's cool. But I think we're going to start maybe creating like evergreen workshops, because that feels super aligned, and our people are always asking us questions about certain things, and it just feels like a natural next step. So it's like, you don't have anything to sell, or if you're a service provider, maybe you're booked out, maybe you're not, but like, if you don't want to add more people to your service provider thing, you can always sell like workshops or digital something, or be an affiliate for somebody else's thing, create a little commercial, pop your affiliate link in there. I think that those are really, really good tips.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like one way. The other way, which a lot of people who aren't necessarily expert entrepreneurs, they're maybe more content creators, want to think about monetizing is like through sponsorships. Now, again, this is not a quick, and I think anyone who's tried to go down this route knows that it's not a quick and easy thing to do. The way that I think about it is, when you want to be selling sponsorships, and this comes back to creating land that you own and not land that you're renting. I think about what are all the different lands that I can own. Okay, so podcast is one, because yes, you can negotiate with someone on your own around the terms of sponsorship. They pay you and you do the thing, right? And you insert into your podcast, and that's you do all of that. You're not relying on any platform or anyone else to do that.
Yep.
So that's land that you own. Other lands that you own is your email list, right? Like you're building an audience, you own that email list, because if you can port that, if you wanted to change email providers, you can move your audience from one to the other. You can't do that on social media. And then a third way is actually a blog, because, right, like if you have a blog post that's on your website, you own that. That's on your domain, and you can create the content and you can sell ads on your blog posts for, so when you think about that, the way I like to think about sponsorships is not just going, hey, I have a podcast, it has this many downloads, pay me for it. It's like, hey, I have a podcast, and by the way, I also have a blog site, and I also have an email audience of this size. Because can you imagine then how, when you can actually go to someone with that, like it is just so much more enticing when you make the ask.
Combining your assets.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's how I want people to start to think about approaching sponsorships, is more like, how do you actually make it really, really attractive for people, because you've built land that you own, that you can actually now sell, like it creates value for you and for them. And so that's kind of like the second way. None of it is easy or quick, but and by the way, I know, right? And by the way, you can do both at the same time, which is actually the really beautiful thing about creating content. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing.
There's so many ways to like chop and screw and put all of this together. I mean, like growing a business is the same way, right? Like there's so many different ways to structure a business and have offers and support people and market and all of that. It's the same thing with your podcast. Like, don't forget that if you create the podcast, you are the host of the podcast. You get to decide. You decide, do you want to sell your own stuff? Do you want to do affiliate commercials? Do you want to try to tiptoe into sponsorships, and like what sponsorships, and getting really intentional about like, who are you going to be promoting? Because like your audience is valuable. We also don't want to just be promoting things that like we don't really care about, and then losing the trust of our audience, because the trust of the audience is so much more. But I think this leads into the next question of just like analyzing performance of podcasts, because I know that like we messed around and like on our dream board is like getting a sponsorship deal that like feels really good for us. But in order to get there, it takes work, and it takes like hitting certain numbers. Is there certain numbers that we should like start to be paying attention to, things that we should reflect on to see if like our podcast is growing, or like what should we look at?
So it really depends on the goal of it. If you're talking about to get sponsors, there's honestly no magic number. Well, okay, I should say there's like an easy way and a not so easy way. One which needs a magic number and one that doesn't. So what I mean by that is that there are some platforms, like I know Podbean does this, and a handful of other platforms where they have an ads marketplace. And so when you hit, and I think it's something like 10,000 downloads a month, or maybe they have like, it's like prorated. Maybe it starts from like 2,000 downloads a month, and then goes up. Then you can actually start to just kind of very easily tap into their ads marketplace without putting too much effort of your own effort into finding sponsors.
I'm on Podbean, and would we be able to choose like which commercials
Yes.
are which people. It's not just like, we're going to put anything that we want because that's what I don't want.
Yeah, no. So they actually have a way that you can filter like the types of businesses that would make sense, because it has to make sense for your audience and
Yeah.
like, and for for them as well to sell anything, right? It has to align. So yes, you can actually choose like what industry and etc.
Fascinating. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of almost like the easy way to monetize, but it does need a number. Like you do need the downloads that can reflect that. The not so easy way in I'll say this is because it just takes a little bit more effort on your part, is that you actually find sponsors yourself. And for that, there's actually no magic number, because of what it really comes down to, and what you really want to, if you go down this route, what you really want to highlight to that potential sponsor is that you know your audience so well, because you talk about something so specific that it becomes a no-brainer for this business to sponsor your podcast. It doesn't matter if it's like a really small audience, because if it's a really small niche targeted audience and the business that you're looking to work with is like it is a no-brainer for each and every one of the people in that audience to buy from this person, like that is really compelling. So that's why I say, like, for that, there's actually no magic number. You could have a really small audience but still monetize it, because the business that you're looking to be a sponsor is just like such a no-brainer. So yeah, so that, does that answer your question?
Interesting. So I guess like in terms of analyzing numbers and stuff like that, it's kind of like if you want to monetize, the numbers of downloads like could matter or it could not matter. But it's
Yeah.
like taking a look at those. And I feel like just, I guess I'm always underwhelmed when I look at podcast analytics, because the only analytics that I think I really have access to is like the number of downloads. And I
Yes.
feel like since podcasting has been around for a decent amount of time, you'd think that we would have more metrics.
Yeah.
Is there
No.
anything else to look at, or is it literally just downloads?
No, and that's why I tell definitely my audience that you have to be built like the podcast. Again, it's your microphone. You've got to be sending people to your email list, like at the end of the day, because that's really when you can actually start to like get to know your audience and actually start to gather more information about them. Because the podcast in and of itself, like there's podcasting 2.0 that is being worked on right now. There's a few technical things, but like some of the features of that is around beefing some of the analytics and some of the data, but it's also heavily dependent on hosting platforms actually working the 2.0 features into their platform. So there's a little bit of so for now there's not a lot of data that you can get on your listeners, for example. So the best, and that's why I always say this again, you want to create assets that you own and audience that you own, is get them into an email list and start having those conversations directly with your audience.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense and kind of leads me to the last question here of just like future trends for podcasting. You kind of already teased a little bit of it out, but it's like, is there anything that you're seeing in terms of coming down the pipeline for podcasting? Like, is it growing? Like, how do we see it moving forward in the future?
Yeah, there's so this is like a big can of worms. Okay, so um, there's a lot of talk recently about how the podcasting industry is declining, but that's because a lot of the industry part of podcasts look at one metric, which is ad spend, and that metric is very much governed by big podcasts. We're talking like Joe Rogan, Star, like big podcasts, right? And yes, I mean, I don't know if anyone else keeps up with podcasting news, but Spotify pretty much have like canceled a lot of their contracts
Oh,
with these
wow.
big podcasters, because it just hasn't netted the the gains that they thought that it would from an advertising perspective.
Okay.
So if you're hearing that narrative of like, well, podcast is declining, then just
It's
know that it's,
dying, just like
yeah,
blogging. Blogging is dying. It's like
yeah.
blogging ain't dying, dude.
Yeah, exactly. It's because it's being looked at very specifically from one perspective. So I see podcasting overall growing by way of the number of people who are going to be entering, because just like we're doing now, it's like, yes, if you're not podcasting, start podcasting. Like it's literally a no-brainer. So we're definitely from a ground from at the ground root level, the ground I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
We're trying to like grow the podcasting industry, and it is literally every single day we're getting new podcasters entering the industry. So it's never going to go away. It's never going to die. So that's from like a growth perspective. Now, then there's like the content creation perspective. Potentially, and this is like kind of like a fight that I'm like very much against this, so it's kind of a flag that I'm gonna die on this hill. Is like AI is obviously getting smarter and better, and there are going to be more people who are going to leverage AI to even create their podcast content for them. I do not.
People want to listen to robots?
Well, the robots are sounding better. This is the thing, right? Like, and AI will just keep getting smarter. I fundamentally do not believe in this strategy, by the way. So I just want to make that really clear. But I can see this as a trend potentially coming down the pipe, where more and more people are going to be like, well, I don't want to, like, I want to be more efficient. I want to like do all the good things, which is great because we all want to be more efficient. We all want to spend more time doing the things that we love doing. But we shouldn't be doing that at the expense of fundamentally what it is that you're trying to do, which is why we create content is to create a connection with our audience. And fundamentally, if you're going to do that, you have to do it yourself as the human. So what I see happening is that more and more people are going to leverage AI for that. I would definitely not recommend that you do that. Now, and this is from an AI software founder, right? So I'm like, you want to keep the human parts human, and you want to leverage AI where it makes sense, which is, you've already created the human part of it. You've already created the content. Now let AI actually help you repurpose and amplify that content, that anchor content. So I see that happening, potentially coming down the pipe as well. And oh gosh, I lost the last thread. I had the third one that I was going to talk about from a trends perspective. Anyway, maybe it'll come back to me, but
yeah. So I think that that's really interesting. And what I think is going to happen too is like with AI content, like people are using AI for blog posts and like all of this other stuff. I think that like human connection is going to be increasingly more important. I think storytelling is going to be increasingly more important. I think video is going to be increasingly more important because it's proof that like, hi, I'm not using AI to go ahead and record this. And I think that people are just going to crave deeper connection with people. And so like, what a better way to do that than like creating a podcast either on an audio only platform or a podcast on YouTube where it's like a video platform, or taking advantage of those things. But I think that it's so important. And I think we have a lot to say. If you're passionate about what you're passionate about, you have a lot to say about what you like, what you don't like about the industry that you're in, and like whatever. And I think what a beautiful way to create your own little pocket of community than to be able to share your perspectives, because that's how we evolve.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, all of this is like insanely helpful. Thank you so much for coming on. I do want you to give a shout out to Capsho. Like, let us know where we can learn about it, where we can test it, all of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So Capsho is, just go to, actually, that's a good point. So if you already have a podcast, and even if you just live stream or you create video content for YouTube, so if you have any kind of video, audio, long form content, Capsho is for you. And Capsho is going to make your life so much easier and get you results, but as well, by the way, because it was built by marketers. And so we've inbuilt human marketing intelligence with sort of the efficiency of artificial intelligence. And so if you create any of that content for your business, then you're going to want to try Capsho out. You can do that at freegift.capsho.com. We have some bonus resources when you do opt in at freegift.capsho.com, like how to leverage in-app SEO and how to actually get yourself visible on social media. Like, we have bonus mini audio courses for you as well. And you also get an extended free trial of Capsho. So definitely go to freegift.capsho.com.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely check that out. even the beginning stages of the platform that you created was so intelligent, and like I love the way that it pieced everything together. So I'm excited to dive in and like see this new version, especially for podcasters, because I think that it's so needed. That's like a huge issue with being a podcaster is like, okay, maybe I love creating the content and I'll push it out, but it's like, shoot, man, now I got to like clip this and like I got to promote
Mm,
it and be intentional about this and that and like all of that stuff. It does take so much time. So I think Capsho, it's such a great tool for somebody that's like, you know what? Like I really want to start a podcast, and you can get the support of AI without taking the human out
mhm.
of actually podcasting. I think that that's amazing. Definitely check that out. The link to that is going to be in this YouTube video description below. And then do you just want to tell people where they can learn more about you or connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. So I am the two platforms that I'm mainly on is LinkedIn and Facebook. So if you want to come and connect and hang out and have conversations, just find me there. Deirdre Tshien, which is like obviously the easiest name to find. So yeah, definitely come find me, hang out. Let me know that you watched this live stream or recording on YouTube, and yeah, we can definitely have a chat.
Awesome. So I will link to all of Deirdre's stuff. Deirdre, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So let me just pop in me right here. Okay, cool. So it's time to wrap up this episode. Like I said numerous times, all of the links to everything that we talked about is in the video description below. And then one last time, I've mentioned Curiously Guided literally 45 times on this episode because how could I not? This is the podcast that I co host with my friend for intentional business owners and curious minds. We just started season 4. Definitely check us out. You can go to curiouslyguided.com or you can search Curiously Guided on any listening platform. We would love if you listen to some of our episodes. I think you're going to get a lot of juice through them. But until next time, remember that you get to grow your online business in a way that feels good for you. Keep testing, keep tweaking, keep experimenting, and I will see you in the next interview. Bye.